tell me your name and where you served and when you served there.
Okay. All right. So my name is Amorena Killough. I served in a small village in Benin, which is in West Africa. The village was called Bakba Agbagule. There were actually two different villages right next to each other. And I served from September 2016 to about November of 2018.
Oh, so you're very recent.
Yes, yes, compared to many other.
You're by far the
RPCs.
most recent that I've interviewed
For you.
so far. That's
Okay.
great. That's great. Well, all right. Now, the other thing that makes you sort of exceptional here in this group is that you have a father who was in the Peace Corps. Nobody else I've talked to came from a family of Peace Corps volunteer. So what I'd like you to do to start out, is take your time doing it too, is tell me about your family and about your dad and what influence he had on you
Sure.
going into the Peace Corps. I think everybody would want to know that.
Sure. Okay, so I was actually born and raised in the Philippines, to a dad, of course, who was in the Peace Corps. So my dad was a U.S. citizen, or still is, a U.S. citizen, and served in Guatemala in the early 80s. And he moved to the Philippines after graduate school and met my mom there. And when he moved there, he was working for a government, or a what are they called? Non-governmental organization, an NGO.
NGO, yeah.
So they did rural development. It focused a lot on agriculture, and kind of looking at, actually, I'm not 100% sure. But yes, in agriculture work, in the rural parts of Asia, rural parts of the Philippines, and also in rural parts of some African countries and some Latin American countries. When my mom and dad met actually at a meeting, my mom at the time was working for the Department of Agriculture in the Philippines, and so my mom and my dad connected, and then they just started a family. So I grew up around people who worked in the rural development field. That was just kind of what I had known. I knew about the Peace Corps. That was already a plan of mine. My plan was to go to college, then eventually join the Peace Corps, because I did want to follow in the footsteps of like rural development, rural work outside of the U.S. So I would say that that's probably, I guess, like the main influence that my dad had on me, is just surrounding me with people who already work in rural development my whole life.
So he didn't have an argument ready for you about why you should join the Peace Corps.
No, not at all. I never felt forced. He never forced that on my brothers. He never mentioned it. I mean, he did, of course, mention it, but he never said, this is what you should do. I encourage you to do this. What he did say, though, is if you are very serious about international work going forward, the Peace Corps is a great way to get my feet in the door, or my foot in the door.
Yeah.
And so and back then, even though now the trajectory of my life has kind of changed from international development to working more here in the US. So back then it made sense for me to join the Peace Corps and to experience a different part of the world, because like I said, I did grow up in the Philippines, and that was a great experience. So I wanted to just experience a different part of the world.
How much of your life did you spend in the Philippines?
Yeah, I was like a month or 2 months away from turning 15 when we moved here. So most of my life, most of those formative years, those early years of life, was based in the Philippines.
You speak Tagalog?
I do, yes, I do. Still do to this day. I speak it with my brothers. I'm not very connected to the Philippines community in Oklahoma. But I still practice that with my brothers, and I still speak that language with my childhood friends that I'm still connected with.
I think that's just wonderful. Wow. So give me some idea of what your life was like before you moved.
Before moving to the U.S. or moving to Benin?
Before moving to the U.S. You said you were 15, about 15 when you moved. to the U.S. So, what was it like your childhood in the Philippines?
Sure. So the community that I grew up in is actually a very interesting community, not something that I've heard a lot of people experience. So basically the office that my dad was working in, also, when I was born, my parents decided that what worked best is for my mom to stay home rather than work, but she was very involved in our community. And so the community that we grew up in it was about, I think like 100 hectares, which I think they say is about like 50 acres. I don't know the exact, the exact conversion there, but in this lot or in this area or neighborhood, let's say, the office of the what is it called? International Institute for Rural Reconstruction, that was the organization, IARR. The office was in the middle of it, but then there were houses around this office where kind of like international people who were working there were housed. So basically I grew up with people from all over the world. Grew up with Filipinos, my neighbors were Pakistani, Bangladeshi, someone from Ireland, Australia, I mean just all over the world. So I was exposed from the get-go to different cultures, different types of people.
That is amazing.
Yeah.
Absolutely amazing.
Yes, and definitely something that has shaped me into the person that I am now.
Absolutely.
And it was a very tight-knit community because within this community as well, you know, we had like a community garden, we had a basketball court, a swimming pool, and then every summer my mom, that's why I say my mom was still involved with the community, was she would come up with summer activities for the youth while we're out of school. So instead of us just, you know, walking around doing our own thing, she made sure that we had kind of still like learning experiences. So even if that meant like a camp, or we would go on hikes around the neighborhood, because the neighborhood that we live in, they're also what we call an eco-tourist destination.
Why?
So they've got lots of like native plants, native birds. They do lots of like kind of like hiking trails within that area. And oddly enough, actually, fun little tidbit, Peace Corps Philippines now trains at this community.
Oh, wow.
Yes. Huh. So after college, so we moved here before college, but after college, I moved back to the Philippines to the same organization. I did an internship there. And I actually got to meet the Peace Corps cohort that was training there. And so that, I guess also that conversation kind of really led me into the Peace Corps experience. So between my dad being in the Peace Corps, between speaking with Peace Corps Philippines, new trainees, that kind of made me decide, like, okay, the Peace Corps, I guess, is really the next step.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes, and then, so going back to the Philippines, or to my childhood, so again, I grew up with 2 other brothers, but I grew up in a large family, and so my family, every summer we would see them. My cousins would always come stay with us. So very, again, tight-knit community, which is very common outside of the Western world, I guess. It's a lot more community-based than individual-based. Yeah. Like I said, tight-knit community. I went to a Catholic private school in the Philippines, which is not uncommon. Like, it's fairly, like, Catholic schools are very common in the Philippines. A lot of people go to private schools. So, yeah, kind of an interesting combination.
Boy, I'll say.
Yes.
It just sounds terrific to me.
Yes, yes. And actually, when I went back to the Philippines after college, a lot of the people that I was working with in this organization were there when I was growing up. So that was an interesting experience. And oddly enough, too, my childhood best friends were also working at this organization when I went back. So it was just kind of like this next generation of rural development people coming into the workforce and work field in the Philippines.
And tell me again where this was?
The organization?
No, the town.
Oh, it was in Silang, Cavite. The province is Cavite, and then Silang is the town.
About what size would the town be, population-wise?
Oh, I would not know. I do not know. I don't know at the top of
Was
my
it
head.
crowded?
When I was growing up, I wouldn't say necessarily crowded. It was, I think, on the smaller end. The community that I grew up into, we were kind of on the outskirts of Silang, so we weren't even in the town proper. And I would say I probably grew up, the community probably had about like 50, 60 people in it.
Mm-hmm.
And then...
And they were all your friends?
And all, yeah.
Everybody was
Yes.
friendly?
Yeah, and we also did, and again, this is part of what my mom, when I say my mom was involved with the community, is I think it was like every month, once a month, we would do what we called culture nights.
Mm-hmm.
So everyone from the community would just kind of bring a dish native to their home.
Yeah.
And we would just all meet up and just kind of eat the foods together, try the foods together. And then any special occasions, like for example, for Thanksgiving, as we know, is a very American holiday. So we would always have like a turkey, and we would have the full Thanksgiving dinner, and kind of that culture exchange, like very similar to what happens when you join the Peace Corps. So again, I think grew up in that mentality of community care, community connection, and learning about other people's lives.
Now you said you have several brothers, is that right?
I have two, yes.
Two brothers.
Mm-hmm.
Who are they, and what are they doing now?
Yeah, so names? Are you wanting names?
Yep.
Yeah. So my oldest brother, his name is Paul. He is working for OU Children's in the maintenance department, but he also has a business on the side. He does remodeling of homes, so I think it's like Killough Remodeling. I don't remember the exact name, but he lives out in Midwest City with his girlfriend. So he has 3 children and a 4th coming on the way, which we're very excited about.
Mm-hmm.
And then my other brother, his name is Ryan. Him and his girlfriend live in Del City, so we're all in the same, kind of close enough. And
What's he do?
And he also is working for the maintenance department at OU Children's, from my understanding. And then I believe once in a while he kind of helps our brother Paul out if he needs some help with some extra, I don't know, hands, arms, I don't know, with his business. Mm-hmm. So, and Ryan also has 1 daughter. So total, I have 2 nieces, 2 nephews, and an extra niece on the way. So.
Okay. It sounds like, now are they younger brothers than you?
No, they're actually both older. We're all a year apart.
Okay. So, you have this perfect entree into Peace Corps that you explained to me. They had a perfect entree into Peace Corps too, but they didn't do it. Mm-hmm. Why do you think that is? Have you ever thought about that?
I think school was not for them.
Oh. The academic part?
Yes, and although the Peace Corps doesn't necessarily require a bachelor's degree, they, I think, prefer at least a bachelor's degree, or at least years and years of experience in the field that you're going into in the Peace Corps. And yeah, my brothers, I think Paul went to college for a year and then decided that it wasn't for him, so he dropped out. And then Ryan, I think, didn't even, from what I remember, didn't even go to college at all. Again, I think they just realized early on that academics, the school thing, was not for them. I think they also just kind of got comfortable with the life that they were building in Oklahoma, and weren't as curious about the world as I am.
Okay. That makes perfect sense.
Yeah, it's not for everyone. I get that.
No, it's not. Even when you have a role model right there.
Yeah.
Still.
Yes.
It's your life, not her life. Yeah. I'm wondering what it was like when you found out that you were going to move from this wonderful place that you loved so much to the U.S. Mm-hmm. How did you why did you move? I guess your dad got a new job?
Mm-hmm. Yes, he did.
So tell me about that.
Yeah. So again, a bit of an odd situation, but again, my dad's from Oklahoma. Actually, he I think is from Skytook, which is a small town outside of Tulsa.
Yep.
And so growing up, we would come visit my family, who was back then my grandparents lived in Tulsa. My grandma now lives in Albuquerque, but back then they lived in Tulsa, and then I had an aunt who lived in Arkansas and an uncle who lived in Stillwater. And so every so often we would come back to the U.S.
Like every couple years?
Every couple of years. Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. I think probably my 15 years of life, we probably came back maybe about 5 times.
Oh,
probably.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And then I know my grandma at least went back 3 times, but one of them was for the wedding, so I wasn't there yet.
Yeah.
And I think it was 2 times when we were already around.
Now I'm assuming that you spoke Tagalog and English growing up, right?
Yes, so the Philippines, actually their language of education is in English. So especially if you're in the...
Is it still?
It is.
Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that they had changed it a few years ago, that the president of the Philippines at the time had said the official language of education in the Philippines is Filipino.
Oh, okay. That was around the, I guess I don't remember. I guess the last time I checked on it was when I was living in the Philippines, again after college, which was from 2014 to 15. So maybe it has changed. I'm assuming you're speaking of Duterte, I think was his last name.
I think it was before him.
Someone else. Okay.
Yeah.
But I know that when I was living there, that's also when they switched over to a K through 12 school system, because it used to, when I was there, you actually only did K through 10 before you went to college. So you went to college at 16 years old, which, looking back, I'm like, at 16 you're making these big decisions. That's a little scary. So,
yeah.
But when I was growing up, the language of education was in English. So
okay.
I definitely spoke English as well in the schools, but also we spoke it at home with Dad, and then also with the community that we lived in, because again, it was a lot of international people. The common language for everyone was English. Or the common denominator language was English. So I was exposed to English at a very young age. And so yeah, we never had any issues speaking with our grandparents.
So this wasn't some terrible, wrenching part of your life to come to the U.S. because you'd already been here 5 times.
Yeah. I wouldn't necessarily say that it was terrible. I think, making that big of a change as a teenager has some type of impact, right?
Sure does.
Self-esteem, with emotional development, with maybe educational development as well. And so there were definitely some challenges, but not a complete 180. Like, I was excited to move here. I was excited to get to know my family here in the US. I was excited to be closer to my grandparents here. I also knew that I wanted to go to college here in the US, and so to me, it was just kind of like, okay, I'm just moving a little bit earlier than college. Like, I was gonna move at 18 anyway, so now it's just at 15, and at least we're kind of dipping our toes in the water in the education system in the US. So in the moment, I was definitely excited, and like I said, I wouldn't say that there were any major... It wasn't like a major bad experience, no major culture shock.
So your first reaction when you found out you were moving to the U.S. wasn't, no, I'm not going.
No, not at all, no. It was very much so, oh, okay, we'll be close to Lola Peggy. So Lola is grandma in Tagalog, as you may know.
I still remember some. Kanti lang.
Yes. Yeah, so like I said, I wouldn't necessarily say that it was like a bad, terrible thing,
No, so it turned out to be pretty good.
Yeah.
All right. And you were about 15? Were you thinking when you were 15 and moved to the U.S. that you were still going to join the Peace Corps and follow through with this plan you had, or not?
No, it was part of the plans. I remember writing essays, like in high school, some teachers will have you kind of create like a life plan, or goals teachers will help you like set goals and things that you want to achieve in life. And I remember always writing down, join the Peace Corps at some point. Originally, I did want to join I originally wanted to join the Peace Corps right out of college. But I was just missing the Philippines a lot, and reached out to, again, like I said, that organization that I grew up in, and was just kind of like, hey, any chance you all are interested in having an intern? And when they said yes, it just felt like that was the right opportunity in the moment, and I told myself I can always join the Peace Corps later on.
Sure.
But this is an experience that I want to go back. I want to relive that life, and reconnect with my family and friends there.
Where did you go to college, and what did you study?
So I went actually to OSU, Oklahoma State University, so not very far from here. I studied sociology and gender and women's studies, and then I minored in international studies. So I remember taking a sociology elective in high school I went to Deer Creek for high school, and was very intrigued by learning about different cultures, learning about human interaction, and I was also just very interested in gender studies and women's history, and I realized that I found out that was available at OSU, and so that just kind of made sense for me.
Yeah.
And so I took that, and then, like I said, a minor in international studies as well.
Okay. At the time, what years were you at OSU?
I was there from 2010 to 2014.
Oh, okay. All right. And so then in 2014 or 15, you went back to the Philippines?
Mm-hmm. Yes, it was. I graduated in May of 2014, and then I moved June of 2014 to the Philippines.
Oh, you wasted no time.
Nope. Nope. I moved out of my house in Stillwater, stayed with my parents for a couple of weeks, and flew out. So, and I was there until about March of 2015. So less than a year in the Philippines.
Okay. Tell me about that year.
I was working as, like I said, a research intern. So I worked on two different programs, and then I did some side work as well. So the first program that I worked with in that organization was a nutrition education program. So the organization IARR was working with the Department of Agriculture in the Philippines to create school gardens at local schools, or at public schools, so not private schools, but public schools in Cavite. And so the idea was that you had the students creating the school garden, so they had an actual gardening class, and then the fruits and the vegetables that they grew there were being used in their let's call it canteen, but a cafeteria.
Yeah.
So the people who were preparing their food were actually using the food that they were growing. So that was the one part. But of course, when we're thinking of upstream solutions to any issue, right? We decided to also get parents involved, because it's like, okay, well, if they're eating this at the school, that's great, but we also want to make sure that they're eating balanced and nutritious meals at home. And so another component of that program was working with the parents of these students and kind of providing them with recipes, actually. So we created different recipes of how you can incorporate fruits and vegetables into your daily meals.
Were the parents receptive to this?
I would say about half of them. I think only about half would show up. And I don't know what the reasons were for why some of them wouldn't show up. I don't know that. But I would say the half that were there were very, very receptive and were excited to learn about how to cook. There's a very nutritious vegetable called moringa is the scientific word for it, but in the Philippines it was called malunggay. And malunggay grew, everywhere. Like, it grew like weeds. Like,
what's it like?
So it's small. The leaves are about this small, so they're very, very small. They taste kind of similar to kale, so it's a little bitter.
That's why you eat the leaves?
Yes, you eat the leaves. That's why a lot of people don't really love it, because of that bitter taste. And so most of our program and most of us teaching most of the things that we taught the parents, honestly, was to try to how can we hide the flavor of malunggay or moringa so that you all can still eat it. But it is, if anyone's ever interested in looking up malunggay or moringa, it is very, very nutritious. Like every vitamin that you need basically is in this one tiny leaf. And it's like I said, it just grew everywhere in the Philippines, so it was an easy, or something that people had very easy access to. So that was the first program. The other program I worked with, I did a lot of actually like this, qualitative interviews with female goat farmers in Quezon, a different province. So the province was about 6 hours, 4 hours, 6 hours from Cavite, which
Quezon province?
Quezon province, yeah. And so I worked specifically with these farmers to just kind of ask them. I was just gathering baseline data for a new program, a new project that IARR was working on. They got this grant for working with, again, like female farmers specifically, to make their goat farming more climate sensitive, or just basically just like better for the climate. So climate agriculture. Again, I don't know the details. I don't honestly remember the details of the program. I truly was just there to gather that baseline data of like, well, how are you guys doing it right now? How do you feel if we did this? So that was like the remainder of my my service there.
What did you do with the data that you gathered?
Oh, I just gave it to the organization. I think they just kind of ran with that. I think I think it was like a 5-year program. And so I don't know exactly, because it was also towards the end of my internship there. Majority of my internship was with the nutrition education program, and then I think it was like the last month they were just like, well, if you want to do this, feel free to do it. And then I also led some gender and gender workshops with actually a local municipal, so like the government officials, basically just kind of talking to them about like gender equality and yes.
Wait.
So
there was absolutely no gender equality when I was there.
I can imagine. I can imagine. Yes. So I truly was honestly just talking about like, this is how we should treat women. We should treat women with respect. And just kind of, so luckily with that specific project, I was able to at least use my degree because I felt like I wasn't really using my sociology degree.
Did you have some confrontations from some people when you were going around espousing gender equality? Would some man get up and say, "What are you get out of here"?
No, I feel very lucky that it was well received. And a lot of the men there were just like, okay, yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. Yeah, women deserve respect. Interesting concept.
Well, of course, when I was there, that was a long time ago, and I would expect there were to be changes, and I'm sure there was.
Oh, yes.
By the time you were there, and I think you benefited, I guess.
Oh, absolutely.
From a lot of that more enlightened thinking.
Yes. I'm sure my conversations were much easier in 2014, 2015 than they would have been in like the 70s or the 80s.
Yeah.
And at that point too, there were quite a bit of female government employees as well, women government employees. So they were also at this workshop. So at least at least I wasn't only talking to men.
Yeah.
But like I said, it was well received. Yeah, and it was a very interesting experience, and I think that was my first realization that I'm a great facilitator and presenter, because that's the type of work that I do now, is facilitating discussions and presenting information.
Well, I can see it right now. I can see how you are very good at it.
Thank you.
Yeah. So you came back to the U.S. at that point, I guess.
I did, yes.
Or did you want to travel around some before you came back?
Well, I stayed for about 1 more month, and I went to Vietnam with a friend. So my childhood best friend, her name is Joycen. Her dad at that time was working for another NGO in Vietnam. And so we were just like, well, we're already here and you're not working. Let's go visit my dad and explore the northern part of Vietnam. So we did that. We were there for about a week and a half, but I think it was about 10 days. And then I went back to the Philippines. We went back to the Philippines, and then I traveled to my family and stayed with my family for a little bit. And then I finally decided to move back to the U.S.
You decided to move back.
I did, yes. They
So
actually.
you could have stayed.
I could have. They offered me a job at the organization.
Company that you work for?
Yes, yeah. They were willing with that, with the climate, with the goat farming program. They did offer me a job. I just decided agriculture, although very interesting, and I'm very interested in climate justice, like the climate conversation, but I just knew that wasn't necessarily what I wanted to do long term, even though, funny enough, my Peace Corps service was very focused on agriculture work. But yeah, I just decided that was not it. And
did you have some idea at the time about what it might be?
Not really. If I'm also being very real, my mom passed while I was in the Philippines after college. Yes.
In the Philippines?
She was here. No, she was here in the U.S. She had been battling cancer my whole college career. So she was diagnosed with cancer my freshman year, so the spring semester of my freshman year, and then she died like the July after I graduated. So that was also part of the and sorry, I'm laughing not because it's a good thing, but just a natural response to something that's a little uncomfortable, I guess.
Yeah.
But that was part of my thought process, was I just wanted to be near my family. Like, I don't know if I'm assuming you've lost some people.
Sure.
Whenever you lose someone, like, death just feels really, really close. And I just wanted to be home here with my family. So that was part of the reason why I also came back here.
Oh, okay.
There was a lot going on.
Yeah. So at that point, I guess you were. How long did you stay?
In the Philippines.
When you got back here.
Oh, after the Philippines.
Yes.
After my internship, I was here so I believe I came back April or May of 2015, and then I left September 2016. So about a year and a couple of months.
Before you joined the Peace Corps.
Before I joined the Peace Corps, yes.
Now, I'm interested to know, it seems like you could have very easily rationalized your way out of the Peace Corps by saying, hey, I've already had all this experience. Mm-hmm. I don't need that kind of experience. Mm-hmm. Did that ever occur to you?
No. Not really.
No?
I think it was just one of those things where it's like, no, I've wanted to do this. My dad at that point also, he was kind of like, yeah, I think you should. Like, why not? Try it out. I know that my mom also loved the idea of me exploring the world. Like, so before I left for the Philippines for the internship, I told her, I was like, I can stay here and like help take care of you. And she was just like, why? Go live your life. Like, you are a young person, explore the world, see what's out there.
Very unselfish on her part. Very unselfish.
Very much so.
Yeah.
Yes.
Amazing.
And so I just decided that also, be careful. That's very light. It might fall over if you kick it.
Oh.
So that never crossed my mind. I knew that's what made sense. I knew that my mom would have encouraged that, would have appreciated that. And like I said, it was already part of my plans anyway, so it just made sense.
You didn't have any fear that you wouldn't be accepted, did you? You sound ready-made. You sound like a poster girl for Peace Corps to me.
Yeah.
With your prior experience.
Yeah.
And growing up in the Philippines and everything. I mean, your dad was in the Peace Corps. Mm-hmm. But I'll ask anyway. Did you have any fear or trepidation about getting into the Peace Corps?
Actually, yes, I did. My mom was battling cancer my whole college, and I did not do very well in college when it came to grades. Like I did great in school my whole life, and then my first year, so freshman year was fine, but I think the diagnosis of my mom just really got to me, and
Sure.
there were I just didn't know how to process those feelings when I was, 18. You're a child. It feels like you're a child. Not in the moment. When you're 18, you feel like you're an adult, but looking back now, like, no, you were a baby. So I didn't do as well as I wanted to in college, and that was my biggest fear, is because the Peace Corps asks for your transcript. And I was very terrified to turn my transcript in. But the Peace Corps, surprisingly, I got through the screening process very, very quickly.
What was that like?
So
screening.
I put in my application, which I guess application probably would have been different when you were applying for the Peace Corps. Yes, mine was all online. So it was a long, pages and pages and pages of just random questions. They asked about mental health, they asked about physical health, they asked about like health history. I had to do like a personality test. They would give like different scenarios, and they would ask, well, what would you do in a situation like this? So I think they were screening, yes, for technical skills and educational skills, but I think they were also screening for cultural knowledge and cultural skills and cultural competency, because
Sure.
you kind of
should.
need yes, as they should.
Yeah.
So yes, it was just pages and pages of questions. Like I said, I did personality tests, and then
Did you ever get any? Did you ever ask your dad for any assistance as you were filling all this out?
Oh yes, I did.
You did.
Yes, he looked over my resume. He looked over the cover letter. He looked over the essays that I wrote for the Peace Corps. He was very involved, but in a good way. Not taking over the application. He was definitely still giving me my autonomy, but he was there to support the whole process.
He might say, you might word this a little differently
Exactly.
here, that kind of thing.
Yes, very much so.
So he was helpful.
Helpful, yes.
That's the word.
Yes,
helpful.
that is the word.
Okay.
Yes, he was helpful, not overbearing.
Okay.
And then, like I said, I turned in the application, and then about 2 weeks later, they called me and wanted to set up an interview. And it was a virtual interview, so the person that I spoke with was based in Dallas, and so it was just over the computer.
And you were in Oklahoma City?
I was in Oklahoma City. Mm-hmm. And it lasted about an hour. And then about 2 weeks later, they gave me the offer letter, which after I spoke with all of my Peace Corps friends, my cohort members, it sounded like I was one of the ones who had a very quick turnaround. Everybody else didn't hear for like 6 months. Some of them didn't even hear for a year.
Yeah.
So I think that cultural competency really got
absolutely.
me. And experience with other cultures really got me to the top. So I do appreciate that the Peace Corps, again, didn't focus just on technical skills, because at the end of the day, you can train.
Or academics.
Or academics, yeah. Again, that stuff is important, of course, but you also want a good balance of emotional and cultural intelligence.
Right, absolutely.
Yeah, and I actually, so when they offered me the letter, they originally offered the letter the service for Mali, so it was not Benin initially, but still West Africa. Oh, the other thing I forgot to mention, so I studied French in high school, I knew a tiny bit of French, but not really enough.
Yeah.
Not enough to say that I was fluent in French, but I did. Part of the application, when I went through the application process, is they ask for your top 3 countries that you want to move to.
Okay.
So they ask for your top 3 countries and your top 3 sectors, like which field do you want to work in.
What were your top 3?
So I actually just put anywhere in the world. So I put anywhere in the world, and then I put the Philippines for the second one, and then also for the application, so they ask for which country, but then right below it, you can explain why you want that country.
Yeah.
And so I said anywhere in the world, and then for the explanation, I said I do have some French skills, so I think I would appreciate a West African country, just so I can develop those French skills. And then for the second one, I said the Philippines, stating that, well, I know the language, I know the culture, so I might be able to connect, to build that rapport a lot quicker. So yes, so they offered me Mali, which is a West African country.
Well, if I'm evaluating your application, and I see you put West Africa first, because you speak a little French, in the Philippines, where you've lived and where you grew up, second, and you've already had experience there, to me, that would be saying, I don't really want to go to the Philippines. Am I right?
A little bit, yes. Like I said, I wanted to experience a different part of the world, but I also recognized that my knowledge of the language and the culture could play a big part, again, in building that rapport easily.
Absolutely.
So I wanted to also let them know that I'm not against going to the Philippines, because I'm sure they could post me in a different part of the Philippines.
Sure.
But I think I also kind of made it clear that it's not my top priority.
I think you put it just right. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Exactly like you said, because it wasn't, you weren't saying at all, I don't want to go to the Philippines. Not at all. But I prefer this.
Yes.
Let's try this.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
and you said that when you got word it was Mali. Okay. What did you think about Mali?
Well, first off, I was very excited that I was able to get into the Peace Corps, because like I said, I was quite nervous about possibly not being able to get in because of how I did in college.
Were you really?
I truly was.
You were really nervous?
I was very, very nervous, even though my dad told me that's not all that they're looking for, you're fine. But in the moment, that just had a really strong hold on my mental capacity. So the second I saw the email that said congratulations, I just honestly dropped my phone and I was like, oh, I got in. I have no idea where, but I got in. That's all that matters. And I remember running to my dad and telling him I got in, and so he asked where, and I said Mali, and his face immediately was just like, safety reasons. I'm a little concerned. Because we also, in the email, they also stated that that Peace Corps Mali had been shut down, and that we were the first for safety reasons, and that we were the first cohort going back in to Mali. And so when Dad saw that, he immediately was, because I didn't really understand geopolitics back then as much as I do now, even though there's still so much for me to learn, but back then especially I didn't know as much. And so he said, I'm quite surprised actually that Peace Corps is ready to open Mali back up. And I think, so that was like end of 2015, and I believe we were supposed to leave February of 2016. And then about a month later, we got another email stating, for safety reasons, we've decided that we're not going to open Peace Corps Mali back up yet, but we want to offer these two other countries. So they offered Guinea and they offered Benin.
You could take your choice?
Either one, yeah.
Okay.
They gave me the option. And so in Guinea, it was going to be maternal health. The field was going to be in maternal health. And then in Benin, it was going to be food security. So again, agriculture-based, nutrition-based food security.
Which you said you already knew wasn't going to be your thing.
Not necessarily, yes. The agricultural part, I was very intrigued by nutrition education, the nutrition education piece of it, but not really kind of like animal husbandry. I was not very interested in that. I was interested in gardening, but not as much as I was, oddly enough, with maternal health. So originally I was going to choose Guinea and do their maternal health program there. But after talking to Dad, again, just for safety reasons, he was just kind of like, I would prefer that you go to Benin, but of course...
Did he tell you what's going on? Did you find out what's going on?
It was just like the
Guinea?
heat of Ebola, the Ebola outbreak, and there was just a lot of cases in Guinea.
I didn't even think of that.
Yeah. And he said, he was like, Peace Corps takes or their volunteers' health very, very seriously, but he still was a little anxious about that, and so I did take that into consideration. And also Guinea, although a French-speaking country, it also just kind of depended on where you would have been posted. Whereas in Benin, they really specified, this is French. You're going to learn French in this country. And so when I saw that, I was just like, okay, this makes more sense. You know? Go to this part of the country, do nutrition education, gardening, learn some animal husbandry, and then learn French. And so that's how that's also why me leaving for the Peace Corps took so long after coming back from the Philippines, was because it got pushed back because of Mali closing down.
Right.
So
when did you go? Where did you go for training? And tell me about your training group.
Sure. Okay, so like I said, I left September 2016. So our training cohort, which in French it's called stage. So I'm used to saying stage instead of cohort.
How do you spell stage?
It's just STAGE, like stage.
Okay.
So our stage met in DC. That's where our kind of initial Peace Corps basics training was. So that was I believe 2 or 3 days. And then there were 31 of us in our stage.
31. From all over?
From all over the country. And we were 3 different cohort, or 3 different sectors. So we had the environmental action sector, which is what I was under. There was the health sector, and then there was the community economics development sector. So econ people, business people, basically. In Benin, we technically had a 4th sector. It was our TEFL group, our Teaching English as a Foreign Language group, but they did their training separately from ours.
Oh, okay.
They left a little bit earlier than us because they needed to be there for the school year. So I technically didn't train with the English teachers. But
Did you have the opportunity to join them if you wanted to?
Oh, yes. Yes, absolutely. And even some of our mid-service trainings actually were with the education volunteers. We were called Stage 29B. So 29A were the English teachers, and then 29B were the rest of us, the 3 environmental action, community economic development, and health volunteers. And yes, it ended up being, I think there were 11 community action volunteers, 10 of the health volunteers, and then 10 of the economic volunteers. When we flew, we used Ethiopian Airlines, which was kind of cool, but it was interesting because we flew all the way to Addis Ababa on the eastern part of Africa, and then had to fly back to the western part. So it was a very long and interesting trip.
Wow.
I also remember, this was my first time ever being to the African continent. So although I was exposed to, I believe my neighbors were from Kenya growing up in the Philippines. Although I knew of African people, there was a bit of a culture shock in the plane, if I'm being very real.
Sure.
So going from Addis Ababa to Benin, it's like, you know how we always have our assigned seating in airplanes?
Yeah.
There was no assigned seating. You just walked in and everyone was just all over the place. And at one point, I think someone in the back was having a heart attack, because I remember multiple people were running to the back. It was chaotic. I'm not gonna lie. It was a very interesting flight, and there was a moment where I was just like, okay, it's gonna be a chaotic 2 years. It's okay. You're gonna be okay.
Wow.
And then, yes, getting off the plane in Benin, that humidity was the first thing that hit us in the face. And so the capital in Benin is called Cotonou. Benin is actually very interesting. There's 2 capitals. There's the real capital, which is Porto Novo. But then I think that was more, if you think like cultural capital. But then if you're talking about like the economic capital, where like the government officials were living, they were living in this city called Cotonou. So we stayed there for a couple of days, and then they took us to this town called Lokosa, which is on the on the western part of Benin, very close to the Togo border. We were only about maybe like 30 minutes from the Togolese border. It was very, very close. In this, so the way that they set up our 3-month training, so Peace Corps, you do like your 3 months of technical training, cultural training, language training, and then you do your 2 years of service after that.
Yeah.
So in La Cosa, we had an actual training center. So they had, it was like an enclosed center. We had, like bunk beds as like for little rooms. We had a conference room. They had smaller conference rooms for when we all broke up. But then it was in this, again, town, and so we were allowed to go out. We were allowed to explore the town, buy our food from the mamas selling beans or fish outside of the training center. The way that it was set up too is okay, let me try to explain this. So most of my training was spent with, of course, all of the other environmental action volunteers.
Yeah.
So a lot of our group training, so for all of our cohorts, including health and economic, that's when we would be at La Cosa. But most of the week we were in our host families, which were in like, so let's say La Cosa was right here, and then there were multiple smaller villages around La Cosa.
Right.
And some of them, like these 3 villages were environmental villages, these 3 were health villages, these were economic volunteers. And so we were placed with our host families. And they also placed us according to language level. So when we first got to Benin, they did kind of like, I can't remember what it's called, but it's basically just like an interview with someone who speaks French, and they grade you on how much French you know, and which group you need to be paired with. And so with the environmental volunteers, there were 3 different levels. There was the beginner level, the intermediate level, and the advanced level. There were 5 of us in the beginners level. There were 3 in the intermediate, and then there were 2 in the advanced level. And so when we would so most of our days truly was just language and cultural training. And then at the end, so maybe the first like 6 hours of the day, and then at the end of the day, we would combine with all of the other levels of environmental action to talk about technical training. Mm-hmm. But even the technical training honestly was in French. And so there were a lot of times where I was a little lost, because although I knew a little bit of French, it wasn't enough for me to truly understand what was happening in the beginning of training, at least.
Did you have the liberty to say, hey, slow up, I didn't get that?
You absolutely could. I just felt a little shy.
Because you'd be doing it all the time?
Yes. Yes. And so, yes, so I lived, like I said, I lived with a host family. So, we spoke French basically 24/7. The only times I really didn't speak French was when I was actually physically with other volunteers. But yeah, most of my day during training looked like, I would get up around 6 in the morning. My mama would have breakfast. Generally it would be like a scrambled egg and a baguette with some coffee, like the Nescafe.
Yeah.
And then the Peace Corps car. Well, actually, no, they did not pick us up. We would walk to our training center. And we would be in training from about 8 until 5 p.m. Mm-hmm. And then we go home. And then most of my evenings I just spent with my mama in the kitchen, because I wanted to learn Beninese cooking. Also, I wanted to learn French. And my host family was incredible. They were so patient with my French. Oh. The way that they really slowed things down. I also felt very lucky. My host siblings were similar to my age. Or no, excuse me, not similar to my age, but similar to my French age.
Yeah.
And I also had siblings who were in high school. So they were also learning a little bit of English. So we were able to kind of go back and forth with the English and the French.
Sounds like it would be an exciting day, but at the same time, an exhausting day.
Oh yes, I slept well every single night because I was exhausted. I also felt very fortunate because we had electricity in my host family.
Oh, you
Not
did?
every single volunteer did. Yeah. And so I also had a fan, so that also helped me
Wow.
with sleeping well. And it was nice. My setup was very nice. They basically, it was kind of like a mother-in-law setup. So I wasn't living with them in the main house. I had this like side house and my own bathroom too. And I even remember my first day there, my host papa was installing a toilet. Like he didn't have a toilet, and he was just like, "No, but we want you to have a toilet." And I was just like,
They didn't have a toilet, but they wanted.
But they wanted me to have a toilet. So I was like, "Thank you so much, but also, you know, I want to live like you all." So you didn't have to do that.
But I did.
But they did. Yes, I also was their first volunteer, but they did not stop after me. They kept asking for volunteers. They really liked the experience.
Good.
And to this day, I still speak with them through Facebook.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, and then at the end of my 3 months, this is the funniest thing. My host papa, just like over dinner one night, he just starts speaking to me in English. And I was just like, "Okay, so you know English?" And he said, "Do you know what I do for work?" And I said, "I know you're a teacher." He's like, "Yeah, I'm an English teacher." I was like, "So you made me struggle." Because he never spoke to me in English, only French. Which I also later found out Peace Corps told them, you know, like, even if you speak English, please speak to them in French, because that's how they're going to learn. And I appreciate
Exactly
that.
right. Exactly right.
And I very much so appreciate that. And yeah, yes, I had a really great experience with my host family. But like I said, so most of our training was, again, very intensive. So it was 8 to 5 Monday through Friday, and then 8 to noon on Saturdays. So we really only had Sunday off and Saturday afternoon off.
So you were in a classroom all day?
Pretty
or were you
much.
going out?
Oh, it was a mix. It was a mix. So like the language classes would generally be in the classrooms, and then, you know, we would go out to this animal husbandry farm, or we would go out to this plant or like vegetable farm over here. Or one time we even were just like, "We're really burning out, can we go to the beach and have class there?" And they were like, "Yeah, let's go, let's do that." So that also kind of helped, like that balance of inside the classroom, outside of the classroom, which again is really the best way for people to learn, is that hands-on experience.
It is. One of the reasons that I didn't speak Tagalog well at all, was because the family that I lived with kept caving in and speaking to me in English.
Oh no, okay, yes.
And I didn't say, "No, I just want you to talk to me in Tagalog." I didn't say that.
Okay.
I seemed receptive. I seemed happy when they talked to me in English.
Yeah.
And it was not to my well-being, you know. So I never did learn Tagalog that well.
Okay. Also though, I will say Tagalog is a bit of a hard, in my opinion, a bit of a hard language to learn as well, because it's like a mix of, it's a bit of a tonal language as well. Like one word can mean multiple, I guess it's the same in English now that I think about it.
Yeah.
But one word can mean multiple things depending on how you say the accent at the end or in the middle. So
Sure.
And your host family probably was just like, "Oh, this kid is struggling."
Yes, and I was.
Yes. But yes, I was very thankful for my family. I actually, during our swearing in ceremony, they actually chose me to do a French, well, me and another volunteer named Brian, they chose the two of us to do the French speech, basically. Like, basically thanking the host families and this and that, because I guess Brian and I had the most improvement in our French.
Great.
Which I think having a little bit of a French background definitely helped me learn it much quicker than other volunteers.
Right.
So, yeah, yes, it was a very interesting and great experience for me personally.
And was there any complications during this 3-month period that made your job more difficult? Did anything come up? Did anybody raise any problems?
I wouldn't wouldn't necessarily say that. Mm-mm.
I ask that because I remember people in our group did, they did have some problems and from training.
Like them not understanding what was happening, or
Just various things. I mean,
Okay.
it might be a misunderstanding with somebody, and then the misunderstanding didn't get translated well, and so that made it worse. That kind of thing.
Okay. No, our cohort was a fairly laid back stage cohort. I mean, of course, like, I think a lot of people felt like they were being babied in a way, like infantilized in a way, which I didn't see it as that. I saw it as we kind of are, because we're like an infant to this culture and to this language. So I saw it as no, they're taking us step by step. But a lot of men, specifically, I think their ego was being a little bit hurt by not being able to have as much freedom, as much, because we had curfew. Like, there were times, there was a specific time when we had to be back home at our host family or at the training center, and a lot of people just didn't love that, which I get that, like when you're 24, 25, 26, and now there's this group of people telling you, no, you need to be home by 9 p.m. Like, I understand that, and I think, again, they were perceiving it a little bit differently than I was, and so there was a little bit of frustration there, but I wouldn't necessarily say that it hindered service or completing service or learning or anything like that.
Were you a pretty tight-knit group?
I would say so, yes, absolutely. Even the other stages would say that about our group as well, where they were just like, ugh, that group, they're so close to each other, they know each other very well. We also did, we did a lot of things together, after training, go grab a beer, and it would just be like a big group of us, or go grab dinner together. We really tried to make everyone feel included.
Did you travel together?
Some of us, not as like a large group, but quite a bit of us would go.
We had weekends free. Did you have weekends free?
So, technically yes, but Peace Corps really only wanted us to leave our village once a month for about 2 to 3 days.
Nope.
They really wanted us to stay in village, but a lot of times, a lot of us would coordinate which weekend we would go to the capital together, so that we could, do the capital life. Yeah. Enjoy the English, enjoy our friends.
Sure.
And that was about once a month. And then, yes, a few of us, like I went and traveled to Togo and Ghana with some people. I know some people who went to South Africa. There was a music festival that was happening in South Africa. So a few of them went there. A few people went to, Europe, I guess, was like one of the more common places as well. A few of us really wanted to sneak over to Nigeria, because Nigeria is to the east of Benin, but we were not allowed to go for safety reasons, supposedly, according to the Peace Corps.
What about Benin at the time? Was it a dangerous place or not?
No, not at all.
There were not gangs roving around, and no?
I think the main concern that they had in the southern part of Benin, I guess there was I can't remember the name of this specific practice, but I believe it's related to the voodoo religion. So Benin
that's where voodoo comes from.
Yes, exactly. I was about to say that. Yes. Yeah. So it's the birthplace of voodoo is in Benin. And in the southern part, which is where voodoo, so I would categorize Benin as like 3 different religions. The northern part of Benin was very Islamic. The central part was very Christian, but more Protestant Christian, not very Catholic. And then the southern part was more voodoo based. There's a town called Ouida, which is kind of like the birthplace of Benin, or of voodoo. It's also one of the ports for enslaved Africans. Like, that was one of the ports in West Africa. And there was this, I can't remember the name of this specific tradition that they had, but where basically, apparently it's just like all of these people who are practicing voodoo going around villages, and they would just, if you were like in their way, they would have no problems harming you, basically. And they did not really post a lot of female volunteers in that part of Benin.
Yeah.
It was mostly male volunteers. And Peace Corps Benin was on top of letting them know, hey, this is happening the next couple of nights. Please get inside your house and stay in your house once it gets dark. And please don't leave, even though some of them would try because, you know.
Because they could.
Because they could and they wanted to, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And one of them actually did get hit, but I was like, that's on you. Peace Corps told you not to do that, and you still did that, but it's okay, he survived. But besides that, it was a very peaceful country. There were
there wasn't a lot of open conflict between people about religion.
No. Oh, no, not at all.
However, you did say that the top part, the northern part, was Muslim.
Yep.
The central part was Christian.
Mm-hmm.
The bottom part was, or the southern part was voodoo. Mm-hmm. So they're not living together, are they?
Not really. I will say though, a lot of people practice Christianity and voodooism, and so in my village, even though they were a small group, there was a small group of people who practiced voodoo, and we had actual temples, like their little sacrificial temples in our village. So those two, yes, voodoo and Christianity coexisted well. Islam did tend to kind of like stay in the northern part of Benin. Although again, I know like one of my closest friends in village actually was a Muslim man, and his family was Muslim, but they lived kind of on the outskirts of the village. So again, they're coexisting, but still separate.
Yeah.
Keeping their distance. But like I said, nothing too crazy. I know the year after I left Benin, I know that the northern volunteers were evacuated because Burkina Faso, which is the border on the northern part of Benin, Burkina Faso was having some attacks on Americans that were living there. And so just to be on the safer side, they just went ahead and evacuated all of the people up north, and then the pandemic happened, so then they evacuated the whole country after that.
Yeah. Now, what did you, after your training was over, 3 months, you were assigned to a permanent residence somewhere. Mm-hmm. Where was that?
It was in the central part of Benin, in the province called the Collines. And in French, collines just means hills, so it was a very hilly part of the country. And I lived in a very small village called Pakpa Agbagule. Again, two different villages, but right next to each other. They used to be one village, but political reasons, I guess they decided to split up, but still coexist. I technically lived in the Pakpa side, but like one of my counterparts, one of my coworkers lived in the Agbagule side, so I would just do a lot of back and forth between the two. But also, I mean, like our community garden was right in the middle, the school is right in the middle, the healthcare center was right in the middle, and so a lot of my work truly was just between both villages.
Yeah. And did you spend your entire assignment there?
I did. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes, I was there for the full 2 years. It was an interesting, so I was the 5th environmental action volunteer, so the 5th food security volunteer that they had. So a lot of the projects
in that town,
in that specific village, yes. Because my main counterpart, his name is Vincent. He just had a really good rapport and really good relationship with the Peace Corps, and so they were continuing to give him volunteers, which I appreciate that he understood the American culture. I really appreciated that. However, it did make it a little bit harder to do the projects that were specifically taught to me because it had already been done by the previous volunteers.
Yeah.
And so, for example, like the community garden, I didn't have to start from scratch, which was nice. It had pros and cons, right? Like it was nice because it was already there, so I truly was just there to support, to maybe teach them anything new that maybe they haven't heard of. But at the same time, for my first year there were a lot of times where I just felt like I didn't need to be there, because I was just like, what else am I supposed to do when they already know everything that Peace Corps taught me to teach them. And so that's when I started working more intersectionally, and so I started doing a lot more health issues or health conversations.
How did it come to you to do that?
Well, I was talking to my counterpart, Vincent, about it, and I was just telling him, I'm like, I just feel like I'm not doing anything. Mm-hmm. And of course he was very kind. He was like, no, you being here is doing something. Like, you're teaching us about America. You're teaching us all of these new things. You're exposing us to things. And that's when he just, so the closest volunteer to me was about a 15-minute moto ride from our village, and she was a health volunteer. And Vincent had mentioned, well, I know they do a lot of health work over at this village. Do you think you could do that here? And so we started then talking about that, and then I connected with the pharmacist at the healthcare center, and that's when he said, oh yeah, we need help with malaria prevention. Good. Yes, so that's when I started shifting more into like the health field, which is what I was quite interested in anyway. I said, I wanted to do maternal health in Guinea, and so it kind of worked out for me. And so I started what we call a care group. So the idea is, it's basically like a trainer of trainers. So I had this group of 10 women. Mm-hmm. Every week we would meet up and we would talk about a health topic. So whether it be malaria prevention or nutrition education or breastfeeding or
and they all lived in these two communities.
In these two, yes.
Okay.
And then their goal for the next week, up until the time we meet again, was to talk to 10 other women. So by the end of it, even though I was only talking to 10 women, the idea is that we were reaching 100 women in the village. Also, between the two villages, there were about 2,000 people, is what they said.
Okay.
Is the number that they were giving me. I'm still convinced that it was less than 2,000 people. I swear there were not 2,000 people in those villages. But that's what Peace Corps kept telling me. They said it was 2,000.
Why do you think they do that? Why do you think they exaggerate it? What point would there be to exaggerating it?
I don't know. I guess I don't know. I've never really thought about what could possibly be the reason why. I mean, that could also possibly be what the village was telling Peace Corps, without them really sitting down and counting how many people were actually in the villages.
Sure.
Yeah, so I don't know. I've never really thought about that, though.
Yeah. Well, anyway, you were reaching a lot of women this way. Mm-hmm. And I've talked to other volunteers and found that a lot of women were interested in farming because the men weren't living there. Where were they living? They'd gone abroad. They were working abroad. And that left the woman and the children to provide for themselves. Now, the husband would send some money back from his job in the United States or wherever he was. Mm-hmm. But they were alone, and they really didn't know a lot about farming. Mm-hmm. Am I describing anything that you saw there? Or not? Actually not.
No. I would say our village was quiet in the middle of the day because everyone was out in their farms. Moms, dads, children were all out in the farm. There were very few people. I mean, most of the people that would stay behind, of course, were, like women with younger kids who couldn't necessarily work yet. But no, I would say that most of the women in my village was very knowledgeable when it came to agricultural practices, and they had their lots and their lands that they were also tending to.
And they were not living apart from their husbands. Mm-hmm. Their husbands lived there and also worked there, right?
Yes,
okay.
Most of the time. Mm-hmm.
All right.
Something very interesting about Benin, although it's not legal, so polyamory, specifically for men. So men were allowed to have multiple women, but they were only legally allowed to be, similar to the US, I guess. They were legally only allowed to marry one person, but it was very common, and it was common knowledge that most men had multiple partners. Oddly enough,
I didn't know that.
Yeah, well, common knowledge within the village. Like, everyone knew that, like, oh yeah, this guy, he's technically married to this woman, but like this other woman's also his wife, and this person's also his wife.
So he might have children all over the place.
Pretty much, yes. And also, oddly enough, the way that, so in homes in Benin, the mom and the dad had separate bedrooms. It's very, very rare for you to see them in the same bedroom. And I think part of that is that privacy for other partners to be able to join, to come over and
Wow.
spend time with their partner there, or with their husband there. But yes, there would be like multiple children. It's like, oh, this person, yeah, that's the dad, but also the mom's different. So, yes, so.
And it's legal, and it's also socially acceptable.
Yes. I wouldn't say it was, technically you could legally only marry one person, but it was
Yeah,
very,
you said that,
yes.
married, but cohabitating is not marriage.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it was fine. Yeah, people
Okay.
had multiple partners. It was socially acceptable.
Could a woman do that? Could a woman say?
No. It was one way, only one way.
What do you think of that? I mean, when you found that out, when you went there, weren't you kind of incensed about that?
I'm not gonna lie, I was a little bit in the beginning. I think that's not the culture that I grew up with. It took me a second to understand that this is what's accepted in this part of the world and in this specific country. But it took me a while and a lot of thinking and processing through that, and talking through my other Peace Corps friends about what that meant. Back then too, although I don't really identify with the specific religion anymore, back then I did identify as a Christian, like as a Catholic specifically, and so I had this very specific thought of what a family is supposed to look like, and that was not it.
Yeah, right.
And I even remember when I finally found out that my counterpart Vincent, when I found out that he had other wives, it took me aback a little bit. Because for the longest time I thought that he didn't, because although a lot of people did have multiple wives, some people still didn't have multiple wives. Again, it wasn't like a requirement for you to have multiple wives.
Right.
And so the whole time, because I had only seen Ina Bertin, which is Vincent's mom, or Vincent's wife, I had only seen her. I never really saw any other woman helping, unless it was like their kids, their daughter. So when I found out about Vincent, it shocked me a little bit.
How'd you find out? Did he tell you?
I'm trying to remember now. Actually, I think it was his wife who told me. I think one day we were just like sitting outside, and she had just mentioned, oh yeah, because I had technically already met the other wife in passing, like in a different village. Okay, so no, let me rephrase that.
Yeah.
So our village was Pakpa, but my market was in this town called Glaswe, which was about 45 minutes on a motorcycle from my village. And there's a tiny village outside of Glaswe. I can't remember the name of this, but anytime Vincent and I would go to the market, we would stop by in this village and have a drink and eat. And there was this one woman who would always serve us the food and would talk to us and this and that. I didn't think much of it. But then I think one day I was just like talking to Ina Bertin, Vincent's wife that I was aware of. And she in passing was just like, yeah, you know, like that woman, his other wife. Just
his
like
other wife.
Yeah.
What?
I was like, so it's a thing, first off, and you know it. And she basically was just kind of like, yeah, I'm tired. And I think she was just like talking about like physical intimacy, like it wasn't there anymore between her and Vincent. And so she was just like, yeah, he can get physical intimacy elsewhere. But yes, it was a bit of a shock, like I said, not what I was expecting. I didn't necessarily like talk to Vincent about it. I was just kind of like, this is just the culture. This is his life. I'm not here to judge.
Right.
I shouldn't be here to judge.
Yeah.
Even though I think there was a slight moment when I did slightly judge, but then I thought about more of it, and I was like, no, it's just different cultures, right? Different societies, different pressures, different lifestyles, and then I don't know, we just moved past that.
Okay, let me just ask you this. Play sort of devil's advocate here. So it's all right for men to sleep around like this, but you're also there and to teach something about gender equality. How does that square?
I think my approach to gender equality was more respect and no physical abuse. It wasn't necessarily about, no, you should only have one partner.
Yeah.
Even though some people could argue, I guess, that part of respect is just having one partner. But my main focus truly was just like, no, women shouldn't be, if they don't want to be physically intimate with someone, that should be respected, right? Young girls shouldn't be, or like older men, or just men in general, shouldn't be involved with younger girls. And if someone is trying to get involved with you, you need to tell a trusted adult, tell a parent, come talk to me. Hitting is not okay. So I think my approach focused more on that rather than kind of like the emotional aspect of respect. But knowing what I know now, I wish I had also focused on emotional aspect of respect. But yeah, I think that's kind of how I balanced it. And I tried to avoid the conversation of, ooh, you should only have one partner. Like, I always avoided that.
I think you were right. Yeah. I think you would have been making a whole lot of trouble for yourself that you never would have gotten out of.
I think so too, and I just would have ruined that rapport, and again, just stay in my lane. It's like, this is what I know. I'm gonna stick to it. Yes.
Yeah. What do you think were your main accomplishments?
Yeah.
From your 2 years in these villages?
Yeah. So I really think that care group was one of my main accomplishments. And honestly, I think it's the second goal of the Peace Corps. So teaching the host country nationals about American culture. Because most of my days was spent truly just connecting with people in the community, like talking to my counterpart, going to talk to my host family there. And so the other thing I forgot to mention, during those 3 months of training, halfway through the training we did two weeks in our post. So we did like 6 weeks in Locosa, and then once we got our post, or the village that we were staying in, we were sent there for 2 weeks just to kind of get a feel for it. And then we came back to Locosa and finished our training there. And so those 2 weeks I also had a host family in our village. So I spent a lot of my time truly just like talking to my host mom there, talking to my counterpart, honestly going to the fields and just helping people like plant, helping people just clean up. So I think my main... Showing
that you were not there just to be a supervisor, but to live with them.
Yes, exactly. Yes, like I truly wanted to understand how they were living. So yes, I think that the care group, so again, the 10 women that spread into 100 women, and then just building that connection, building that relationship with them, and teaching them about American culture were my two main things.
What about the environmental part of it? Do you feel like you made much impact in your mission as an environmentalist?
I don't know if I could say that I did. Like I said, because a lot of the technical training that we got from Peace Corps truly was just like how to tend to the land like indigenous people would, I guess. So Animal husbandry. So again, avoiding, factory farming and just really focusing on like raising your own animals and then using their feces as fertilizer. But like I said, a lot of those things were already in the community. They were already using that information in the community. So I don't necessarily know if I had a specific impact when it came to the environmental field, because they already knew what we were talking about. One thing I did have a bit of a challenge with Benin, with Peace Corps, was they were telling us that we needed to tell our village to stop burning, because it's very common for them to do, we do it here in the US too, it's called
slash and burn.
Yes, where it's just like one part, you just like burn the shrub of one part so that if there is a wildfire it doesn't spread as much.
Right.
And that's an indigenous practice, and so that was also the practice that they were living there. But Peace Corps was telling us that we needed to tell them to stop that because we wanted the native plants to grow. And that was something that I struggled with, even though I tried to talk to my counterpart about it and I said, hey, this is what we're supposed to tell you, that we want these indigenous plants to grow. But it was a lot of like, well, this is what we've been doing for years, and that's how you get the rats out of the bush. So, because they also ate bush rat. That was a very common meat in the not in the Philippines, in Benin.
Yeah.
And that was their way of getting the bush rats out, was like burning one part of it so that they obviously ran away and they could catch the rats.
Catch them and kill them.
Catch them and eat them. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so.
The problem with that, I think, is it's not I don't think it's the Peace Corps' business to go and tell people living in a community, this is what we want you to do or not do. It's not their business.
No, exactly.
The Peace Corps has to go to whatever the government body is there.
Right.
Right?
Yes. That's also part of the reason why they say the first 6 months we shouldn't be doing any type of project. You're supposed to be gathering data. You're supposed to be talking to people to get a better understanding of what projects they want to do, not what you want to do, but what the community wants to do, right? And that's, of course, step one for any type of community project. So that was one that I really struggled with, and that I did not fight my village on that. I said it to them. I was like, Peace Corps told me to tell you this, and then they said no, and I said, okay, there's other things we can do. we'll focus on other things.
Well, did you sit down at that point and write Peace Corps a letter telling them what you think about that?
I didn't. I should have.
You should have.
I should have. Because I even talked to some of my Peace Corps friends, and they also thought the same thing. We should have. Maybe we still can.
Well, I just think that when I was in the Peace Corps and I didn't agree with something, I told them, and I told them why. Okay. And that led to my being reassigned.
Oh, I see. Okay.
And if I hadn't done that, I wouldn't have been reassigned, and I would have continued to live in the same place, doing the same worthless stuff.
Yeah.
So
there were definitely moments where I probably should have just told the Peace Corps, hey, these projects are already going in this village, can you send me to a different village? I think back then too, I just wasn't as confident in my knowledge yet and in my ability to push back and give feedback. I just wasn't confident back then yet, so I just kept it to myself and kind of vented to other Peace Corps volunteers over beers.
Did Peace Corps ever ask you for your input on Peace Corps?
I think at the end they did. I think at close of service they did. Mm-hmm. And I do remember saying, please do not send another volunteer here, or if you are going to send another volunteer, send a different type of volunteer. Do not send another environmental volunteer, because they're not going to have any projects to do that are environmental related, at least.
Right.
So hopefully, from my understanding, they were sending the year that I left, from my understanding, they were putting in a health volunteer after me. But I think that volunteer was evacuated.
Because of
COVID and all of that, yes.
Mm. Yeah. Oh, that's too bad. Mm-hmm. So, you were before COVID?
Oh, yes, yeah.
Yeah, mm-hmm. Okay. Well, Oh, I would have hated that, to have been in serving and then had to leave.
Yes.
I would have hated it.
Yes, me too.
Oh, my.
No, I'm very glad that nothing like that happened to us.
A lot of volunteers that I've talked to have said that they believe that Peace Corps experience was changed their life. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering, I have talked to a couple who said, no, I wouldn't go that far. I wouldn't go that far. It was a great experience, but I wouldn't say it was that. How would you describe it?
The Peace Corps did change my life. Yes, it did. I think the main thing was I learned a lot more about indigenous practices when it came to tending to the land. Mm-hmm. I think that the Peace Corps really was the first turning point for my passion for climate justice. The Peace Corps also was, on a personal note, well, I guess these are all personal notes, but was kind of the first thing that really made me start questioning my religion and the religion that I grew up. I grew up Catholic because as you probably know and remember, most of the Philippines is Catholic. It's a very Catholic-based country.
Very.
And so everyone just grows up Catholic there. And I remember talking to someone in my village who literally told me to my face that if God's plan is for my child to die from malaria, then that's part of the plan. And and that was just my first question of, what are we telling people in this religion that's making people believe that the death of my child, even if I can try to prevent it, is part of the plan? So that was a bit of a turning point as well. Like I said, climate justice. The Peace Corps also taught me a lot about intersectional feminism. So I would say I grew up a feminist, like I was all about women's rights, gender equality. But I think my view of feminism was very much so through a white lens of basically, so I don't know if you've heard of the difference between a feminist and a womanist.
Nope.
So the phrase womanist was actually coined by a black woman, basically saying that like feminism focuses on the girl boss aesthetic, so like women climbing the ladder in corporate America, whereas womanism basically says that yes, that can be a form of feminism, but sometimes feminism also just means like you getting out, or a woman getting out of an abusive relationship. Mm-hmm. But then also womanism also is like the understanding that there's all of these intersections between these different parts of our life that affect our health or affect the way that we live, right? Mm-hmm. So being a black woman, for example, is a different type of feminism or experience from like a white woman, for example. And I think that the Peace Corps did expose me to that. So growing up in the Philippines, you don't really see a lot of black people. And also colorism and racism is present in some ways in the Philippines. And then when we moved here, I went to Deer Creek, which is a predominantly white school. And then moving to OSU, most of my group were all just white people. I just wasn't very exposed to the black experience, or just like people who are not white or Asian experience. And so I also got to experience that in the Peace Corps, and so that also opened this like different world of feminism and womanism for me, which is kind of what led me to the field that I'm in now and the master's degree that I got, and the way that I view like social justice, the climate justice, reproductive justice nowadays.
Tell me about your degree that you got and the field that you're in right now.
Sure. So I have a master's degree. I just completed it a couple weeks ago, actually.
Oh, well, congratulations.
Thank you. It was the end of June. It is a master's degree in public health.
Where from?
From the University of Central Oklahoma.
Okay.
I worked on it for about 2.5 years. It's a 2-year program, but I worked full-time the whole time, and so some semesters I could not do it full-time. So it was kind of a mix of full-time and part-time. That's why it took me about 2.5 years. And I am currently, the field that I'm in right now is actually in adolescent sexual health services and education. So
Adolescent sexual health.
yes, so I work for a community healthcare center called Variety Care here in Oklahoma City.
I know it.
Yes, and so Variety Care, they have health services, but they also have community services or community outreach services. And so part of our program is we actually go into Oklahoma City public school districts and teach sexual health education to 9th and 12th graders. Now, it's not the class, it's when we say sexual health education, people generally have an idea of what it looks like. It's more comprehensive than what we're thinking. Our programs are 3 weeks, so we're with the students every single day for 3 weeks. And yes, we talk about...
You mean a whole day?
So the
or
way
a couple of hours a day?
So the way that we do it is we get paired basically with a teacher, so either like a history teacher or a biology teacher. So we get paired with this teacher, and then we teach every single class that they have that day. So it's about like 4 to 5 classes every single day. So we're teaching the same thing over and over again, but it's different groups of students. And then we do that every single day. So basically those students, for 3 weeks out of the semester, instead of them being in Oklahoma history, they're in sexual health education. Like they're still going to their Oklahoma history classroom, but they're hearing from me instead of their regular teacher. And like I said, it's a 3-week program, so it's very comprehensive. So yes, we do talk about those sexual, safer sex practices, for example, so condom use, birth control, but we also talk about communication skills. We talk about problem-solving skills. We talk about healthy relationships. We talk about unhealthy relationships. What are those red flags to look for in abusive relationships? So that's the field that I'm in now.
Sounds great.
Yes, it's definitely the field that I want to stay in.
Badly needed.
Yes, unfortunately.
Yes.
It is the field that, so going forward, because public health is a very broad
Sure is.
Field. There's many different aspects to public health, but I really want to focus on like reproductive justice, sexual health, or like the climate stuff. So that's kind of, and I think a lot of that truly is based off of things that I learned in the Peace Corps, things that I experienced in the Peace Corps, things that I saw in the Peace Corps, and I just kind of wanted to mirror like teaching about respect and teaching about boundaries and teaching about bodies and sexual health to this part of the world, because like you said, it's also needed here. It's not only needed in Benin.
Are you able to apply any principles from voodoo that you learned? I'm actually just kidding here, but
I mean, I will say though, voodoo is it's a pagan religion, so it's very close to nature, and the appreciation of nature. So I would say, I guess like on a personal level, absolutely. Like I understand the importance of a balanced ecosystem and a balanced human versus nature relationship. So I guess that, but not so much in the classrooms, I guess.
No. Did you ever have any contact with voodoo people?
I mean, I guess I technically did. Not because I wanted to talk to them about voodoo, just more of like, oh, I just know that you're a voodoo priest and you live in my village. I will say, so Benin, January 10th every year is their voodoo festival. So it's a huge festival actually in the Collines. It happens in the province that I lived in. And people from all over the country will come in, and it's just a day of celebration, and they have like the voodoo dances. They do sacrifices of animals, which is personally my least favorite thing about voodoo. I'm vegetarian, and I've been vegetarian for many years, and part of it is because of, part of it is for environmental reasons, but part of it is because I love animals a lot. So that was very hard for me to deal with. And that's also part of the reason why I didn't learn much about voodoo, is because I personally kind of stayed away from it because I was so
Turned off by that aspect of
by
it.
the animal sacrifices.
Yeah.
But yes, I did go to the festival because, again, I was like, this is part of the culture. Also, my dad was in the country. He had come to visit me, and it was around that time.
Oh yeah, I was going to ask if you ever had, if your dad
Yeah.
came to visit you while
Yes.
you were in the Peace Corps.
He did. He was there for about, I think, like a week.
Ooh.
And so we spent some time in my village, but then we also spent time just kind of going to the beaches, going to the voodoo festival, going to Cotonou, just kind of showing him my whole life there.
Oh, I think that's wonderful.
Yeah. I think he
you all
enjoyed
were
it.
able.
It was also his first time there. He had never been to Benin, so he was excited to add a country to his long list of countries that he's visited.
Yeah. Well, I think that's great. That I assume that you could talk to your parents on the phone if you wanted to.
Oh, yes. So, when I first moved into my village, the service was non-existent. I had to walk down the hill, climb this rock, and then I would have a little bit of service. So my first year in my village, I would have to go to Glasgow, which again was the market, and the market was every Wednesday, so I went once a week. So whenever I was in Glasgow, that's when I would call home and just kind of check in or check social media. But then luckily, my last year of service, they added a tower for the cell service that I had. And so last year, I had that option.
Wonderful.
Yes.
Wow.
I felt very lucky because I know that other volunteers did not have that at all. So,
Do you mean in Benin?
yes, in Benin.
Yeah.
And outside of Benin, really. Yes. Because I even remember, of course, Dad did the whole, well, back when I was in the Peace Corps, we had to write letters. And I was like, okay, yes. Different time. Yep.
Yeah, I try not to get off on that when I'm interviewing people.
Oh, he loves it.
Well, I think that, is there anything that you would like to say that maybe you had been thinking about, you wanted to tell me for this interview, that you haven't gotten to yet, or I didn't give you the chance?
Trying to think. I think if anyone were to see this, and maybe if they're looking at this to decide if they do want to join the Peace Corps,
Right?
I still highly suggest the Peace Corps, absolutely, even though, again, now I have a little bit of, how do I word this politically correct and diplomatically?
Mm-hmm.
I think some parts of Peace Corps are too bureaucratic.
Yeah.
And very focused on like the saviorism, white saviorism. I think it can also be focused on that.
Mm-hmm.
And back then I didn't necessarily understand that as much. So I think if someone were to look at this and to try to decide if they do want to join the Peace Corps, like, yes, I think they should, because it does open you up to a whole new world, right? Like, you learn so much just living in a new country. You learn so much about the community, but you also learn so much about yourself and how resilient you can become, how connected you can become with your community, with other people. I think one thing that I would really say for anyone who's interested in joining the Peace Corps is to really look inward, though, and see and be as selfless as possible going into the Peace Corps, and also being as open-minded as possible, because there will be times in the Peace Corps when it might feel like this is wrong, we shouldn't be doing this, or it might feel like Peace Corps is annoying me, or they're too all up in my business or all up in my face. But to really, again, just really try to go in with an open mind, maybe even understand intersectionality, understand the struggles, especially if they are going to go to an African country, to really understand the history of Black Americans and African Americans, because in a way that is connected. There is that connection back home for them. So really trying to understand the struggles of Black, Indigenous, and people of color in the U.S. so that they can go into their service as respectful as they can be and as open-minded as they can be. But I still highly recommend the Peace Corps, even though, again, there's a lot of things I would change.
Yeah.
But that's any Peace Corps volunteer.
That's nothing wrong with that.
No.
In fact, I think that's good.
Yes. Yeah, times are always changing, right? Things are changing. We're learning more information we're constantly learning new things, and so why not apply that new knowledge and for the better. And yeah, I think that's what I would say.
All right. Thank you very much.
You're so welcome.